severe food crisis. And when coupled with population growth and land use changes, this climate variability is predicted to have further severe impacts on global food security. And in order to solve these problems or to mitigate these consequences, we need the implementation of more sustainable resource management of both natural and human resources. And to guarantee this implementation, all strategies need to be socially acceptable and also financially feasible. When trying to find a solution to a problem, we should look at the whole picture, at the whole system, and humans are the core of the system. So everything we do has to pay off back to our societies. So the purpose of this session today is to first see how these problems are directly affecting our societies, and secondly, to analyze the socio-economic dimension of the solutions we have and their implementation potential in order to ensure water and food security. With that being said, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Lotsmart Fonjong, joining us from Ohio in the United States, who will talk about the key role that water plays in accomplishing the household activities for women in Cameroon, and how climate change has been affecting men and women differently since their challenges in society are also different. Welcome, Lotsmart.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Okay, thank you, Daniela and colleague, for the opportunity to share my presentation on this topic, and I thank everyone for coming. The topic is the peril of climate change on water availability and its implications on the triple roles of rural women in Cameroon. What are the challenges and what are the prospects? As you can see on the map, Cameroon is found in West Africa, and one of the great neighbors is Nigeria in the West. And although climate change, as we all know, is a global concern, most of the literature shows that the threat on climate change is not the same for poor and rich countries, and neither is it the same for men and women. In poor countries, the situation is very, very different, and it is present, and it's a serious threat because most of these inhabitants in these poor countries depend almost entirely on natural resources from the environment for survivors. For example, they practice mostly rain-fed agriculture. They collect water from rainfall, from springs, from streams, and from rivers. They hunt games and even fishing for protein, and even they depend on natural plants for healing. So when climate alter the natural processes of things, in this case, when there is instability, when there's decreases or there's increases in rainfall and temperature, the livelihood of these communities are seriously threatened. Of course, the threat is not the same for men and women because women seems to be more vulnerable to climate change. Why? Because the activities that women perform in these communities depend heavily on natural resources. And secondly, women have a triple role. That is, they have the reproductive, the productive, and the community roles to perform. And these roles, for them to be effectively performed, they rely very, very much on adequate water supply. I will show you how that happens. So the focus of our study is if women's triple role, as you can see on this figure, that they perform the productive roles, which include women as income earners, like farmers, and then the reproductive roles, home managers, cleaning, caring for the elderly, and then the community roles like entertainment, community work, which we are not touching on it. So the focus of this study is how is the changing climate and changing availability of water affecting or having impact on women as income earners, as caregivers, and as home managers in poor communities in Cameroon. So in this study, we took one of the communities, which is Moyoka, found in the southwestern part of Cameroon. This is a community of several villages with over 25,000 inhabitants. Here, most of the inhabitants are poor, they are farmers, and they work in plantations. The main plantation that we have in Cameroon that employ over 180,000 workers. Moyoka has two main seasons, the dry and the rainy season. The field work that we did here took place mostly in February in 2017. We worked with 100 women and 10 key informants who were mostly workers in the climate industries. And these women were randomly selected, but we made sure that we selected those who have been living in this area for at least 10 years so that we can get their experiences. And so the main question that we wanted to find out from them is first, wanted to get their perception on temperature and rainfall, and wanted to find out what is the impact of if climate change or if rainfall and temperatures are changing, what are they experiencing in the case of water, and how it has impacted the triple role that we just discussed, and if possible, are there any adaptation strategy that they have put in place? These primary data that we collected from the women were complemented with hard rainfall and temperature data collected from the local weather stations of this giant plantation. So we had key findings, and one of the findings was that both temperatures and rainfall were changing, as shown by the temperature data that we collected from this plantation and also confirmed by the women. And the second key finding was that the declining water situation that resulted from climate change and other factors, that the declining water situation in the area was a result of climate change and other factors. And we also noticed that women, unlike men, perform enormous activities in the areas, and the declining water situation has implication on both farming and the household activities of these women. We also saw that women have attempted some critical mitigating measures, but these measures are not good enough to fight food security and the resulting impact on national security. We came out with some recommendation that needed to be taken into consideration by the public authorities that be. So let me touch these findings a little bit detailedly. When we look at rainfall, we saw rainfall and temperature. We saw that local temperature and rainfall are changing. The temperatures were rising, rainfall were decreasing. That is, annual rainfall were decreasing. And 87% of the women agree that there is that decrease in rainfall. But they are not only caused by climate change, they were also caused by other factors that we later found out to be urbanization, changing in land use. When we look at rainfall was particularly interesting in that for 8 years, the rainfall data that we collected from the local station were actually declining. But 13 of the years, there were some increases in the rainfall, but those increases were in a decreasing trend. For example, if you compare the rainfall of our initial year, 1995, with the 2016, you'll find out that in 1995, it dropped from 160 millimeters to 140. And we also found that when you compare the situation of the declining rainfall with a high temperature, it has affected the availability of streams, of rivers, and of other water sources. So when we look at, we plotted a graph to find out what were the activities that were performed by men and women in these communities. And we found out that women are those responsible for water collection, they are responsible for cooking, they are responsible for cleaning, and they were responsible for most of the activities, both on the farms and at home. And the success of these activities, as you can see on the graph there, depend or they were defined by the water situation of the area. But since we saw that temperatures and rainfall are changing, they have actually compromised the situation of water or water availability in the areas. From the study, we realized that, for example, 40% of the women, if you see how they look at the table here, confirmed that water wells were declining, they were disappearing, springs were disappearing, and up to 52% and 52% and even 80% said that rainfall completely, rainfall was no longer regular, and a reasonable 33% and 28% also saw that streams and rivers had reduced in volume. And we also noticed a significant 43% that also talked about the fact that as a result of these changes in climate and other factors, they were experiencing high levels of pollution, water pollution. So what were the implications? One of the implications that we found was that there were difficulties of women predicting the planting seasons as a result of this changing climate. And secondly, the disappearance of streams, of springs, and rivers also have implication of how they fare. For example, one of the women that we spoke to said, and I quote, "When you talk about changes in local climate, I am reminded of the good years of the 1960s to the early 80s. In those years, it was very predictable rainfall and climate, all the rest were very predictable. For example, they knew that in early October, they could plant again in January, but now it is not possible because of these changes." We also realized that the precarious situation of this water or of climate change on water has implications on women triple role. One, on food security. And food security is very important in that high temperature increase heat and harden the soil. When this happens, what you realize is that the hours that the women spend on the farm had to increase. They have to work for more hours, but unfortunately, output declined in these hours. And what is the result? The result is that of higher food prices and hunger. The year 2008 that are shown on this graph is very important to understand food security. In 2008, we see that rainfall, for example, dropped. And in 2016, it also drops. These 2 years are very important in Cameroon because during these 2 years, we had serious social unrest. And these social unrest were linked to hunger and food insecurity. And because of that, we see that rainfall or climate change is not only a problem that you can look at it as a food problem or a gender problem, but you see from it that it has implication on national security because of the rioting that happened. And we also found that when it does happen, when there is changes in temperature or there's changes in rainfall, and the women cannot predict when the rains are coming, there is double planting because they plant and the food dies because the rain did not come on time, and they have to replant again, increasing their cost. We also noticed that the distances, because the streams have disappeared, the rivers are shrinking, they have to travel long distances to fetch water. This is an extract of one of the women who said that they are not sure that they can send their children to school because they are doing much, but the outcome from their farms are not enough to meet their need and sell so that they can send their children to school. Under this situation, what are they doing? They have tried to adapt some efforts to mitigate the situation. One of it is water conservation, that is that of collecting water when there is rain and trying to store them. But you know that this is not very effective because of the poor hygienic conditions and because of the fact that they don't have large containers to do that. Secondly, they are changing their farming techniques to adapt to these late rainfall or unpredictable rainfall, like late planting. They are doing mixed cropping, and they are forced to increase their farm sizes, and when they do that, what happened is that they need to rent more farms. And of course, they are diversifying their activity. Most of them are going into petty trading, which lead to a serious strain on the women who have now double days, which means the first period they go to the farms, they come back and then go to market to buy and sell, which increase their workload. So based on the study, what we can conclude is that climate change is not only a gender or a water problem, but it's also a food and a national security question in Cameroon that must be treated seriously. It requires both local and national policy that must target, among others, the question of land rights. Land right is important here because, as we said, this locality is situated amidst a plantation which is expanding, and women do not own land. What happens is that they always have to rent, and since the cost of production is increasing, they are producing lesser and lesser, which increase food prices and hunger. And then thirdly, climate change awareness is very, very important, and this will help to deter deforestation, both from the plantations and also promote afforestation. And because of the crisis that women have in doing a lot of work and traveling further and further away in search of water, it is important that even though countries are poor, they should improve and invest on water infrastructure so that these women can have standby or water closer to their homes. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Lotsmart, for your presentation. Is there any question for Lotsmart? I would, while everybody writes their question, I would like to start with one. And I wanted to ask if there has been any correlation with the nutritional status of the women, because I believe with less precipitation, as you said, women have to walk longer distances for water collection, which also translates in higher energy expenditure and probably also skipping meals because of the time they need to walk.
Mm. Yes, because of the long distances now to fresh water, long distances to go to and the extremely hot conditions in which they have to work, it means that normally, even though we never worked on that, but from perception, we've seen that they have to increase high calorie type of food that they consume. But unfortunately, these are poor communities where they don't have the ability to diversify their consumption pattern. So is consumption pattern really changing to affect their nutrition? We did not actually go into that, but I would suspect that it will definitely have an implication. And secondly, the 2008 and 2016 crisis uprising was as a result of food. Therefore, nutrition should definitely play a role in their relationship with the activities that they do. And in this locality in particular, this was one of the core areas of demonstration and protest. So I think there should be a relationship with the nutrition. Nutrition is food. The quality of nutrition is falling, leading to agitation and manifestation. Even though we did not capture that, but we could perceive that from general observations that we carry out.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Heinrich. Are there already adaptation strategies on administrative and governmental level?
Unfortunately, that is where the problem is. But one of the new one that is coming up is that government is trying to take away land from the plantation and giving the land to these poor communities to work on, so that they can increase food supply, because most of these plantations are producing for export. They are mostly producing rubber, palms. So government is, taking away land from these plantations and giving it for women to grow food. So that is one of the positive policy that the government is implementing so far.
Thank you very, very much. If there is no other question right now, I would like to pass on the microphone to our second speaker, Chandra Sekar, who is joining us from Tirupati, India, and will continue talking about climate change impacts, but now on the livelihoods of farmers in India. Welcome, Chandra.
Chandra, your microphone is not on.
Not. Okay. So PPT is visible?
We can see your screen. Now, please select your PowerPoint presentation.
Is it visible?
Yes, now, exactly. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Those are from South Asia. Good afternoon. Those are from Europe and other parts of the world. Good morning to all of you. So I'm going to talk on that. What motivates farmers to undertake farm load adaptation options in India? A systematic review of literature. Basically, this could be the structure of the presentation. I'll go through the introduction, data and methods. Basically, I'll talk on the determinants of farm level adaptation options in India, both based on the quantitative and qualitative studies, and concluding remarks. So as previous speaker, as well as the Daniela, has also mentioned that agriculture likely to be more vulnerable, already vulnerable, likely to be more vulnerable in the future because of the different climate aberrations like climate variability or the climatic extreme events. As you know, in India, the agriculture is the major employment. It provides the around half of the labor force as per the census 2011, half of the labor force employed in the agriculture sector. But if you look at the share in the GDP, it's continuously declining over the years. And given that half of the labor force is depending on the agriculture, and most of the around half of the area is rain-fed, more than half of the area is rain-fed in India. So climate change, climate variability, as the extreme events likely to have. It's already having the impact on agriculture sector, also likely to have more impact in the future, which lead to a yield loss. So the estimates, the recent estimate by Pingali et al. 2019 book, they observed that there could be possible that agriculture yield likely to be reduced by 4 to 88%. It may go up to 25% by 2050. So it's likely to have both food and nutrition security. So looking at the relationship between impact of climate change and agriculture and SDGs sustainable development goals, it will affect, I think, poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption and production, life will last. So what is the major policy concern? The question is that the providing the sustainable livelihood opportunities, because there's a study in India, so they found that if you're given a chance, around half of the farmers will not continue agriculture, will not continue farming. So it's always a burning question for the policymakers how to provide a sustainable livelihood opportunities. That's basically minimizing the volatility in agricultural income. The answer is agricultural innovation. Adoption of technologies, adoption of climate smart practices and farm adaptation measures. That's agricultural innovation. Yeah, the literature suggests that the farmers are adapting to climate change. Because the global studies, they also found that if you undertake the adaptation measures, it may reduce the impact by 30 to 100%. A meta-analysis paper by Saliner et al., they found that productivity on an average can increase by 7 to 15%. And the literature also, in case of India, my own study in 2020 as well as 2021, we have found that Indian farmers are also adapting to the climate change. Okay, it's also observed that my own study in 2019 with Patnaik, that net revenue is higher for adapted households. Those households are basically undertaking the farm level adaptation. Their revenue is higher in comparison to non-adapted households. Similar the career part in 2020, they also observed that insured households have more crop income and lesser outstanding debt. So it seems that farmers are already adapting to the climate change. Okay, but if you look at the adoption rate is very low, and there is also lack of empirical studies. So that's why there is a major research inquiry in the last 15 to 20 years that, okay, what are the determinants? That what factors basically motivate farmers to undertake adaptation measures? But the research gap is that a systematic review of all the determinants. Because there are several studies basically talk on the what are the factors basically influence farmers to adapt, but there is a lack of the systematic review. But there is a systematic review already exists with respect to Asia as well the world level. Looking at the Asia level, there's only 6 studies from India, and the Dangetel, the world level, there's no studies from India. My own study basically recently published was looking at okay, adaptation under the adoption as adapting farmers. So we're basically looking at the systematic review of the determinants of farmer adaptation measures. So basically we adopted a PRISMA approach, basically where we have 4 steps. One is to basically formulate the research question that's basically used basically to search the literature in the web of science to basically identify the journal articles. So basically the research question for us that okay, determinants of adaptation measures. Then you basically employ the inclusion and exclusion criteria, the screening and eligibility criteria to basically exclude few literatures or few studies from the final list and the screening of final under the basically screening of abstract and full text. Okay. Basically, we have used the Boolean operator that's basically in the Web of Science and Harvard references. These are the basically the Boolean operator and or. Basically, we used these words, keywords basically were used to basically search the articles in the Web of Science. This is the procedure we have followed. Basically, when we search using these keywords, we have found that there are only 183 articles. So basically, we have screened the record of 183 articles, excluded the papers if it's not an empirical paper. If it's a review paper or a book chapter, we have just excluded them. Or if it's published before 2001, because we have taken the timeline as 2001 to 2018, because we thought that because of the COP, Bali conference, the COP held in Bali, because at that time there's a discussion on the climate change adaptation. Therefore, afterwards, there are major papers are generated, major papers are come to the market about the climate change adaptation. If at least one study area, not from India. So after doing the record screening, we have ended up with the 37 articles. So from the 37 articles, we have undergone the abstract and full text. Basically, we have selected the 29 papers from the Web of Science, which are basically focused on the farm level adaptation. And we thought, okay, by doing this, whether we have missed any papers, we have basically hundreds of citations of these 29 papers. So we thought, okay, is there any paper missing? So based on that, we have selected an additional 6 papers. Those are basically 35 papers are included in the study for the systematic review. If you look at the study focus, 32 papers focus on only single state. There are only 3 papers focus on the more than one state. If you look at the country, 33 papers focus on the country like India, and the 2 studies are focusing on the other countries including India. And 12 papers are quantitative, those are basically using the econometric or regression techniques or statistical techniques, and 23 papers are more towards qualitative. So if we look at that, these papers basically factors of influencing farmers' adaptive behavior based on, sorry, it's a quantitative paper. Sorry, I did a typo error. It's a quantitative papers. So we look at these 12 papers and basically categorized the adaptation, basically the determinants into a different category, basically climate change and shocks, basically experienced and affected perception and other recent shocks, similar to the socio-economic and demographic characteristics. We consider demographic, caste, education, asset and income, migration, agriculture dependent, farm characteristics. Or we have access to institutions, basically formal institutions, informal institutions, or development-based policy, or the climate information, other characteristics that is basically the risk and attitude, behavior, and others. Okay, Y means that particular study has taken this variable while doing the statistical analysis. No, so no, the dot means the dot line means it's not taken. Okay, so you'll see that if you look at this, so you see, I will find that around 12 studies have taken asset and income. See, the main thing that around only 6 studies, because we're talking on the climate change adaptation, only 6 studies have considered variables from the climate change extreme events, because it is also important to establish whether the adaptation measures are climate sensitive. Because only 6 studies have taken the climate change and extreme events, only 3 studies have taken the perception as a variable. Means that most of the studies are not taking climate change extremely. It's really important to establish that whether the particular adaptation measures we're taking, whether it's basically climate sensitive, whether it's sensitive to cyclone or flood or drought or temperature rainfall. Similarly, if you look at the risk attitude behavior, if you look at the formal institutions or the development-based policies or risk attitude behavior information, climate information, which is a major factor influencing the adaptation measures, the less number of studies are focusing on. It is found that most of the studies are mostly focusing on the socio-economic and farm characteristics. They're not looking at beyond that. So it needs to focus on the other factors like climate extreme events or climate change, as well as the other factors related to risk attitude behaviors, other development policy, because you have other generic policies basically related to poverty eradication that might be linked to the adoption of the climate change adaptation measures. So by looking at the qualitative papers, so what we have found that there are around 23 papers, 11 papers focus on the climate variability, 3 papers focus on the climate variability and extreme events, and 8 papers those are focused on droughts, and 1 paper is focusing on the cyclone storms and floods. So these are basically we have summarized based on the climate change papers by each study the major findings. So with 23 papers, we basically summarize the major constraints. Basically, we found that by doing that, the lack of knowledge about the adaptation options. That's the major constraint. That basically, farmers are not able to take the adaptation options in India. Credit, wealth, climate information, shortage of inputs, and access to agriculture extension and access to market. These are the major factors which basically not are basically influencing the farmers to undertake adaptation, because farmers are not taking the adaptation measures because of these factors. So although we have the studies, the major question is that, so these are the state-wise, I basically consider the number of studies, how many villages they have serviced, considering all the studies and how many villages they have studied. You find that in Bihar, there could be thousands of villages, could be 10,000 or 20,000 villages. But considering all the studies, we have surveyed only 165. State like Odisha, we have surveyed only 136 villages. For some states, there are only 4 villages. But based on these existing studies, can we represent, can this say something about a state? Cannot. Similarly, if you see the number of households surveyed, you find that Maharashtra, state like Maharashtra, there's around close to 7,000 households who are surveyed. In Odisha, there's 4,400 households surveyed. But some states, there's less than 1,000. It seems that the studies we're having now may not represent the entire state. We're still lacking less number of studies. So basically, the concluding remarks, basically, if you look at the major findings, basically the non-climatic factors like demographic characteristics, asset, income, education, dependence on agriculture, farm characteristics, and access to financial institutions are observed as major motivating factors. So limited studies established, as I mentioned, that limited studies established causal relations between climate change and extreme events. There's a lack of research with respect to climatic factors, perception, risk attitude, behavior, and government policies. Although real economics discourse has a lot to do with human behavior, little research has been taken up in the climate change adaptation research in India. Without counting all the papers, we can conclude that a limited number of papers so far with respect to farming adaptation measures in India. These remarks render important avenues for the scholarly communities and policymakers for expanding the domain of future research by realigning existing plans to address the observed gaps and develop evidence-based policies for scaling of farm adaptation methods. So thank you for the essence to listen. I'd like to acknowledge that I got a grant from the IIT to do this study, and this study is forthcoming as a book chapter because this is coming in July 2021. If anyone interested, they can also, when interested in South Asia, they can note down this book is likely to, it's also open access book. It's also open access book. You can freely download this book, Climate Change Community Resilience Insights from South Asia, which is basically published in July. Thanks.
Chandra, thank you very much for your presentation. We already have the first question from Ajay. He's asking if you have some specific examples of Indian farmers adapting to climate change.
No, that's basically my another paper where basically I look at what are the Indian farm, what the examples of Indian farm adapting to climate change, that basically what I found that based on the studies, it's not my own study, my empirical study is different, based on the studies that exist in India. So basically I found that water management is the most adopted options in India. And if he wants, I can share my paper with him.
Thank you. Do we have any other question? Remember that if you want to contact the speakers also later, you can always do it through the platform with a personal message. So I'm sure they will also be glad to keep answering questions later. If we don't have any other questions right now, then thank you, Chandra, again. And
Yeah,
now we will travel to India's neighbor country, Bangladesh, with a presentation from Tawheed Rahman, who will talk about about nature-based adaptation practices that people in the southwestern coastal region of Bangladesh have been implementing in order to ensure food security in such a challenging environment. Welcome, Tawheed. Tawheed, we cannot hear you. I think you have to unmute yourself. On the left side of your screen.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. So can you see the screen?
Not yet. Now it's loading. Yeah.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So thanks, Daniela, for introducing me. Actually, today we'd like to actually present nature-based adaptation practices in ensuring food security in coastal Bangladesh. Starting from our first presenter for this session, we have heard two more presentations already. So I think nature-based adaptation, it means actually how can we adjust the adaptation practices using our rainwater harvesting, and then practicing some low water requirement, low water demanding crops and other issue. So actually, as you know, that in coastal area for any country have been suffering from freshwater scarcity, and another problem is actually salinity problem in the soil. That's why every year actually the salinity issue and due to the lack of freshwater, food crops are productions are becoming much lower in coastal regions. That's why coastal, not only coastal villagers but also the policymakers as well as government are also very much conscious about how to and actually afraid about how to increase the food production, particularly in the coastal areas. So as you can see, the satellite images starting from 1989 to 2016, we have actually analyzed different vegetation practices in coastal places like Mongla. So as you can see that in 1989, it was food production was a bit better. 2004 it was much better, but 2016 it declined a lot due to the actually salinity intrusion, freshwater scarcity, and many other practices. That's why actually farmers are encouraged to apply their indigenous knowledge so that they can come up with the adaptation because with the nature-based means actually they can store, they can collect rainwater, they can actually practice stream cultivation, because as you know that in coastal areas paddy cultivation is a very big challenge, because for rice or paddy cultivation you need to have standing water at your land, and that is very difficult for the farmers to provide irrigation time to time. That's why most of the scientists and researchers of our country, they are employing their knowledge how to solve this problem, and how to actually incorporate as well as promote the nature-based sustainable agricultural practices, mainly to ensure the food security, so that the human migration. Another problem is actually due to this insecure food and insecure water supply. Many people already have been migrated from the coastal village to the nearer big cities. That's why to actually discourage the migration from the coastal areas, government is also promoting coastal villages. Here is the actually Mongla area, then that is the actually Bay of Bengal. So our study area is located almost here. So as you can see, the area is almost 1,461 square kilometer, and this is under the coastal zone policy. And here another region, that is mangrove forest, Sundarbans, and about 80% of the water sources are affected with salinity. So by this time actually we have conducted FGD, focus group discussion, then we have actually surveyed farmers, and we have interviewed them, and we conducted a questionnaire survey. We collected water sample to conduct test. We collected actually data from a local authority, so that a good understanding about the salinity problem and adaptation practices could be achieved significantly. As you can see in this geospatial map, that is actually electrical conductivity. Most of the areas of the coastal areas are suffered with high electrical conductivity in water, that is more than 10,000 microsiemens per centimeter. And then actually the water availability, as you can see that in 2000 or before 1990, the population was much better, but in 2019, the population have been actually migrated from that places to another city due to the scarcity of fresh water, as well as actually scarcity of cultivable lands. That's why since then government have been proposing different practices, like different types of rice cultivation, so that rice need to actually take only a shorter time of interval to grow up and to get matured, so that people can harvest these crops very easily. Other than rice, actually there are mustard and sweet potato, wheat, tomato, turmeric. This type of crops actually are demanding very less amount of water, and their total lifetime, or if you conduct their actually harvesting time, that is much shorter. That's why farmers are getting much more interested to produce saline tolerant crop varieties in the coastal belt. And there are actually lots of other natural adaptation practices, like farmers are trying to adopt say vegetable farming in the rooftop and yard, then mulching with a straw, floating bed cultivation, I will show you later, relay cropping, then vertical farming, because the lands are very much scarce over there. That's why farmers are trying to adjust vertical adaptation practices, aquaponic gardening, zero tillage, and then pond water harvesting for irrigation. And then actually this is actually vegetable farming in the rooftop areas and in the yard system, so that this is good practices, so that the women and farmers can harvest vegetables and different types of other crops throughout the year. And there are actually other practices, like under shades, then wet places, there is platform, and then lowland and furrowland, and cross the pond. So different practices. This is actually mulching with straw practices, plow pan, and then straw mulch. After that, soil with fertilizer, and then you can actually grow your crops like this. Because most of the lands are saline, salty land, right? That's why you have to prepare a land by this way so that you can actually plant your different trees and different actually crops easily. And this is actually rainwater. This is rainwater into this land. This is rainwater. So rainwater. So this water is stored here for irrigation purposes as well as for fishing and aquaculture purposes. So floating with cultivation, this is also another best adaptation practices. Currently, people are following this to get rid of food crisis. And then relay cropping. There are actually different types of cropping like say onion, and then different types of actually cauliflower and other crops. So not a single inch of land are actually left unused. So farmers are trying to utilize most of the cultivable lands, most of the available land, so that they can grow more crops. This is actually vertical farming practices. This is vertical farming practice so that farmers are, planting different crops, different vegetables using this vertical farming practices. Aquaponic gardening. So not only the fish culture, but also at the side of the river bank, there are different types of other vegetables, say like cucumber, and then other actually crops they are producing in the same land. So zero tillage potato cultivation. This potato requires very less amount of water, and pond water harvesting for irrigation. This water is mainly stored from rainy season, and then this water is used for different types of other say irrigation practices, and sometimes for fishing, sometimes for actually other household purposes. So storage method for fish, duck, and rice cultivation. This is a very common practices here. So you can cultivate fish at the same time. You can actually rear your ducks, and you can also produce rice at the same time and same land. So this is also a very, popular advertisement practices in that area to combat the salinity and also to combat against the freshwater scarcity in the um, coastal villages. So if you see the survey results, shift into shrimp and carp farming, say around 60% people already have been shifted. Then saline tolerant and modified crop, that is 76% people already adopted. And then year-round vegetation cultivation, 48% they replied. They are adopting these practices. Managing the straw, 24% of farmers they are following these practices. And vertical farming, this is now getting popular. Aquaponic, 30% of the farmers of this area they are actually practicing this aquaponic gardening. So in conclusion, this Upojala or the actually study area is very much vulnerable due to salinity intrusion and freshwater scarcity. So several crop varieties adaptation measures have been introduced in this region to cope with the adverse situation, and farmers are already familiar with various agriculture adaptation. We call it actually nature-based solution, natural adaptation practices in integrated and well coordinated supervision and administration supports in highly stressed southern area of Bangladesh. So thank you very much for actually listening to this presentation. So if you have any questions, so please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Tawhid, for your presentation. We do have a question, two actually. The first one from Prince: what kind of sustainable agricultural measures are they? I believe this question was answered right after you wrote it, Prince. If it's still not answered, please let me know. And we have another question from Claudia. Is there any natural-based solutions with native plants or trees implemented?
Okay, actually, first one, the sustainable practices, actually, that is one. We are promoting here
I believe Tawhid has internet problems right now. He's out of the room. Claudia, I would suggest you write him directly, and he will be glad to answer you per message, I think, if he doesn't come back right now. But since we don't have a lot of time left, I would then continue with our last but not least speaker, Priscila Silva, who is going to present a poster with her latest research on agricultural insurance, on the use of agricultural insurance as an instrument for moderating the hydrological vulnerability of vegetable production in Brasilandia, and therefore ensuring a stable income for the farmers and their families in the region. Welcome, Priscila.
Thank you, Daniela. I will share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. So, good morning. My name is Priscila Silva. I'm a student from University of Brasilia with Professors Carlos Lima and Ricardo Minotti. And I also work in Emater, that is a rural extension company here. It's a governmental company. And our research is about agricultural insurance as a moderation tool for hydrological vulnerability of horticulture production in Brasilandia. There is a region in Federal District, Brazil. Okay, it's based on the last events of climate instability that happened in 2016 and 2017, called the Rio water crisis period, and affected directly the agricultural activities. And we had the objective to verify if insurance is capable to soften this effect. Okay, Brasilandia is a region in Federal District, is a capital of Brazil, it's Brasilia, and the main activity in the region is horticulture, vegetable productions in general, but have a problem because it's located upstream of the main reservoir of Brasilia, and that supplies more than 60% of the population here. And because of that, the small farmers had to decrease in the irrigation by 75% of the catchments in the water crisis period, which impacted the entire economy here in the region. About our research, we raised information about farming production, hydrological and climate data, and estimated and calculated crops water requirements like crop evapotranspiration and the irrigation shift. We analyzed two main cultures in the Brasilandia because the most productions there are lettuce and strawberry, and we calculate the total cost of the production and optimal productivity. About the design of the insurance, we used two methods, that is Cabral Oliveira from Bolivia and ProAgro from Brazil. About the results, we realized that the vegetable production's impact is most related to water resource management actions. The actions resulting to climate change, not directly to climate risk, like increase or decrease precipitation here. And the climate proposal index here was the useful reservoirs storage volume percentage that considered historical behavior, water crisis period, and annual monitoring curve of the reservoir. About the indemnities calculation that considers the agricultural production index in normal years and in the water crisis years, and others data like water requirements, the crops water requirements, irrigation system types, and water abstraction source, same a type of catchments here, or groundwater or surface. And for the calculated indemnities, we use the percentage of the expected productivity. About our conclusion, we consider that insurance comes as an instrument to aid the economic stability to irrigation rural farms here, mainly to small farmers, and the reservoir level as a climate index and the monitoring curve as an insurance trigger is feasible because it is easily accessible and understandable data for the general population. And about the values, we calculate all the values and we consider that fair because they are based on the current production costs here in Brazil, in Brasilia. And about the conclusion, for effective implementation, we believe that it's relevant to find out the willingness to pay by farmers. That is the next level of our research, because we need to know if farmers have interest to pay some values to have this security. And we believe it also that governmental fostering actions can help in the first moment to increase the interest and the viability of the insurance, mainly in the private insurers' performance. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Priscilla, for your presentation. Is there any question for her? Now would be the moment. Okay, it looks like we don't have any question right now. So I would like to close then this session by thanking our speakers for such fantastic contributions and our audience for your attention and your participation in the discussion. Well, I think we do have a minute for this question, Priscilla. 1 second.
Yeah, I saw. It's about GIS. Analysis involves GIS. We use GIS to do the land use, because you need to do the areas of the productions areas like strawberry and lettuce.
Thank you. If you have any other question or comment, remember you can always contact the speakers directly through the platform. And you can also contact me and my colleague Heinrich through our website, www.foodsecurity.de. And yeah, thank you all for being here, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day.